Content warning. This story includes real incidents of violent crime and graphic descriptions. Viewer discretion advised. All facts are drawn from public records and court documents, including State of New Jersey versus Sergu, 2008. Case-law.vlex.com. This is for educational documentary purposes, honoring Zenifa's memory and underscoring the importance of caution and awareness. What if the person you trust leads you into a nightmare? On September 13, 2004, Zenifa Coleman left her home, expecting a promising job interview, never to return. Instead, her family faced a horrifying absence. Her car vanished. No calls, no reassurance, just a growing dread that something terribly wrong had happened. This is the story of Zenifa, vibrant, kind, and tragically deceived. Zenifa Coleman was more than just her name. She was the embodiment of unwavering resilience. Born and raised in Trinidad, she carried the warmth of home across the sea to the United States. Her journey took her to Michigan, where she adapted gracefully and built a life reflecting both her independence and caring nature. Friends describe her as beautiful, thoughtful, and generous, always ready to lend a hand or smile. By her early 30s, Zenifa had weathered deep sorrow, losing her first husband, but she didn't let tragedy define her. Instead, she married again, determined to forge a new path. In 2003, the couple moved to Elizabeth, New Jersey, and settled into a modest home on Orchard Street. She embraced domestic life while pursuing career, driving her gold 2000 Mitsubishi Galant to local job interviews, hopeful of finding meaningful work. On the afternoon of Monday, September 13th, Zenifa informed her loved ones she was heading to Perth Amboy, about 30 minutes away, for a nanny position interview. She left her home bright-eyed, dressed in a pink blouse, dark jeans, and sandals, carrying her polo purse and keys. Expectations were straightforward: a meeting, a trial nanny role, then a return home. But hours passed, and the call never came. The sun set. Her car remained absent. By midnight, deep worry set in. This wasn't like her. Concern turned to dread, and her sister-in-law spoke to the police the next evening, September 14th. Zenifa was officially missing. Police swiftly distributed flyers. 5 feet 5 inches, 135 pounds. Brown eyes, black hair, wearing her pink blouse, dark jeans, sandals, carrier tan Mitsubishi Galant, license plate PPM 61X. Every detail mattered. Her family hoped someone, anyone, saw something, but no calls came through. No sightings, just silence. Late afternoon, Thursday, September 16th to September 16th, 2004, to be precise. A delivery truck driven through Linden's industrial section triggered the next terror. Near a loading dock off Park Avenue, near Bayway Refinery, a body wrapped in plastic and bound, half-clothed and badly bruised, lay hidden near a chain-link fence. On gruesome confirmation, it was Zenifa Coleman, strangled, smothered, with the same plastic hiding her body. Police and medical examiners confirmed the autopsy findings within 24 hours. She hadn't been shot. She hadn't escaped. She'd been silently murdered. Zenifa's car was missing. For 2 days, their family endured the nightmare. Hope, then horror. Her car reappeared 10 blocks away, abandoned, but clean of fingerprints, offering no clues beyond being found. The contrast devastated them, the loss of innocence and the intrusion of raw evil. This wasn't a random act of violence. Zenifa was beloved, a wife, friend, and homebody. No romantic entanglements. No unsavory habits. No apparent debt or dispute. Police had nothing to suggest personal vendetta. No witnesses. No CCTV. Nothing taken besides her life and her battered body. One suspect emerged days after the discovery, but that trail went cold. It seemed impossible, no clues. But police refused to stop digging. When officers first arrived at the industrial site near Park Avenue on September 16, 2004, they stepped into a scene that was void of common indicators of struggle. No screams heard, no eyewitnesses stepping forward. Just a freight area eerily quiet, save for the hum of distant machinery. There, half concealed beside a loading dock, lay Zenifa's bound and bruised body, wrapped tightly in clear plastic wrap. A white plastic trash bag was knotted around her neck, indicating smothering as cause of death. consistent with forensic findings soon confirmed by the state's medical examiner. Zenifa's tan Mitsubishi Galant was discovered 2 days later, abandoned just over 10 blocks from the crime site. Police were able to gather some trace evidence. Fibers, hair, and plastic remnants possibly from the crime scene, but no fingerprints. Whoever left the vehicle had meticulously wiped it down, even rinsing the trunk to remove evidence. Still, investigators followed every lead. Forensic analysis linked the plastic wrap to fragments found in the car. Cell phone data showed Zenifa's last pings directed her into Perth Amboy, confirming she met someone there. These elements focused suspicion on Perth Amboy, and a name began to emerge: Ricky Sergu. Police learned Sergu was not a random acquaintance. He had reached out to Zenifa just before her disappearance, asking if she could care for his son while he and his wife worked. The call had been logged earlier on September 13th, matching the window of her last known activity. Crucially, Sergu was first questioned 2 days after Zenifa's body was found, but with limited information at that time, the conversation yielded no arrest. Yet his nervous demeanor and vague answers planted a seed in the detectives' minds. By October 14, 2004, detectives had compiled enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for Sergu's home. This search yielded items matching those found at the crime scene: clear plastic remnants, fibers and hairs consistent with materials on the victim, empty baggies and trash from his garage matching the knotting style on Zenifa's body. To steal law, with these findings, they arrested Sergu on October 15, 2004, charging him with first-degree murder and holding him on $5 million bail. Ricky Sergu, 40 at the time, lived in Perth Amboy with his wife and 8-year-old son. He publicly portrayed himself as a dependable family man employed at a local auto body shop. But the investigation painted a different picture: a man with access to means, opportunity, and, unbeknownst to the community, a potential motive of twisted betrayal. Police discovered his long-standing relationship to Zenifa. He'd known her through her late husband and had even helped her during her first bereavement. The benevolent acquaintance had become sinister when he used her trust to lure her into his home under false pretense. 6. Forensics and timelines solidify his involvement. Evidence lining Sergu up with the crime included plastic and fiber fragments from his house matched those found on Zenifa's body. Cell phone geodata placed him at the loading dock and near the car dump site at critical times. Lack of alternative suspects or motives suggested a planned, isolated crime board deception. By mid-October, the case had morphed from tragic mystery to chilling confession, though the public wouldn't know the full story until later. Police tape, industrial site, nighttime cityscape of Perth Amboy. Zoom-ins on plastic fibers, cell tower maps, geolocation overlays. Photo of Sergu with family, fading to interrogation room dimness. This is where the story turns. From a desperate search, investigators uncovered pattern. Call logs, fibers, scrapings, all pointing to someone Zenifa trusted. If this has you gripping your seat, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone? The disappearance of Zenifa Coleman had gripped the hearts of her family, friends, and even the wider community. What began as a routine search for a missing person quickly evolved into a desperate hunt for answers. When Zenifa did not return home on the evening of September 13th, 2004, her family initially hoped that the delay was due to her getting caught up in the excitement of a potential new job opportunity. But as hours stretched into days with no contact from Zenifa, anxiety turned into fear, and fear into panic. Zenifa's husband and relatives were distraught. They couldn't fathom what could have happened to her. She had always been reliable, and even during the toughest of times, she never left her loved ones in the dark. There was no trace of her on her phone, no sign of struggle at home, and no clues as to where she could have gone. It was as though she had simply vanished without a trace. As the family anxiously waited, the police worked tirelessly to gather information. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Evans, who was assigned to the case, quickly noted the oddities. Zenifa had no known enemies, no ongoing conflicts, and no personal problems that would explain her sudden disappearance. Authorities began to focus their efforts on finding her car, hoping it would provide a lead, but even that proved to be elusive. There were no signs of it anywhere near her usual routes, and the police started to wonder if someone was deliberately trying to obscure the evidence. The first major break in the case came with the discovery of Zenifa's vehicle. On September 16th, 3 days after her disappearance, a truck driver made a startling report. While making a routine delivery in an industrial area near Park Avenue in Linden, New Jersey, the driver noticed something unusual, a large object wrapped in plastic near a fence. At first glance, it appeared to be trash, but something about it caught the driver's attention. He and a colleague decided to investigate further and call the authorities. When the police arrived at the scene, they were horrified by what they found. Zenifa Coleman's body was lying lifeless, bound and wrapped in plastic. The scene was disturbing, a reminder that even in the quietest of places, evil could lurk just beneath the surface. Her face was bruised, and parts of her clothing were missing. There was no sign of her car, and no one could explain how her body ended up in such a remote location. The details surrounding Zenifa's death were chilling. Forensic experts quickly concluded that she had been smothered, most likely with the same plastic that had been used to wrap her body. The brutality of the crime was undeniable, and the fact that it had taken place in such a short span of time left investigators with many questions. Who could have done this? Why would anyone want to harm Zenifa? As the investigation unfolded, there was a pressing urgency to find out who was responsible for her death. The police initially questioned everyone close to Zenifa, her family, friends, and acquaintances, but no one seemed to have any answers. The case remained a puzzle, with more questions than answers. By September 17th, the authorities had released a description of Zenifa's vehicle, hoping someone would come forward with information. The Mitsubishi Galant, a gold-colored four-door sedan, had New Jersey license plates that read ppm 61X. As the investigation continued, the lack of clues and information was becoming increasingly frustrating. For days, it seemed like the investigation was going in circles. Despite all the efforts, there were no leads that provided any concrete information. It wasn't until the police decided to revisit the case from a different angle that they finally caught a break. On October 14, 2004, almost a month after Zenifa's body was discovered, detectives found themselves focusing on a man named Ricky Sergu. He was a 40-year-old resident of Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and had come to the attention of the authorities during their initial investigation. Sergu had known Zenifa through her late husband, and the two had communicated shortly before her disappearance. The police were now certain that he had to be questioned again. Sergu had been one of the first individuals questioned by the police when Zenifa's body was discovered. At the time, his answers seemed innocuous, and there was no direct evidence to link him to the crime. However, as detectives re-examined the timeline and traced Zenifa's last known communications, they realized that Sergu had been in contact with Zenifa just hours before her disappearance. Authorities decided to approach Sergu again. This time, they would conduct a thorough search of his home. As they gathered their evidence, they uncovered a shocking revelation. Plastic bags, fibers, and even strands of hair that matched Zenifa's were found in his residence. It was clear now that Sergu had been involved in Zenifa's death, but the details of what had transpired inside his home were still murky. The arrest and the shocking confession. The discovery of evidence at Sergu's home was enough to lead to his arrest on October 15, 2004. He was charged with first-degree murder and taken into custody at the Union County Jail. The evidence against him was mounting, but there were still many unanswered questions about what had happened to Zenifa during those crucial days between her disappearance and her death. Sergu was interrogated for hours, and after much questioning, he finally admitted to his involvement in Zenifa's death. His confession was chilling. According to Sergu, he had contacted Zenifa under the pretense of offering her a job as a nanny for his son. Zenifa, who had been unemployed and seeking work, had agreed to meet him at his home in Perth Amboy. When she arrived, however, things took a horrific turn. Instead of discussing the job opportunity, Sergu attacked her. He overpowered her and held her captive in his home for several days, during which he repeatedly violated her. He showed no remorse for his actions, only a cold, calculating demeanor as he recounted the details of the crime. On the third day of her captivity, Sergu decided to take Zenifa's life. He smothered her with his hands, using all his strength to silence her cries. Afterward, he disposed of her body in the most callous way possible, placing it in the trunk of her car and abandoning the vehicle near the loading dock where it was later discovered. He then left the car in a nearby location, knowing that it would be found, but his actions had already sealed his fate. Sergey's confession stunned the community. No one could understand how someone like him, an individual who had been a family friend, could commit such a heinous act. The brutality of the crime and the premeditated nature of his actions left many shaken. The trial that would follow was long and grueling, but the evidence was undeniable. As the case proceeded through the legal system, Zenifa's family struggled with the reality of their loss. They had lost a wife, a daughter, a sister, and a friend in the most tragic of circumstances. The grief was compounded by the fact that someone they had trusted had taken her life. On November 20th, 2008, Sergey pleaded guilty to the charges of aggravated manslaughter. The murder charge had been reduced as part of a plea deal, and Sergey was sentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving at least 85% of the sentence. After months of legal wrangling, the court reached its final decision. On November 20th, 2008, Ricky Sergey pled guilty to the charge of aggravated manslaughter. This decision was met with mixed emotions. While it offered a sense of closure to Zenifa's family, it also left a bitter taste in their mouths. The severity of the crime, the years of suffering inflicted on Zenifa, the premeditated nature of the attack, and the final act of taking her life, seemed to warrant a much harsher sentence. The court sentenced Sergey to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 85% of his sentence. The news was met with frustration and disbelief by many, including Zenifa's family, who felt that justice had not been fully served. But for the family, there was no other option but to accept the sentence, as the case had reached its conclusion. Zenifa's family decided to make the most of their newfound sense of closure. They knew that there would always be a void in their lives, a hole that could never be filled. But they also knew that Zenifa's legacy would live on in the memories of those who loved her. Her smile, her kindness, and her warmth would never be forgotten. Healing begins, but the pain endures. As the legal process came to a close, Zenifa's family began a long and difficult journey toward healing. Her loved ones continued to gather in her memory, hosting private memorials and keeping her spirit alive through the work they did to raise awareness about the dangers of trusting the wrong people. They found strength in each other and in the knowledge that Zenifa's life, though tragically cut short, had made a lasting impact on those who knew her. For the community, Zenifa's death served as a stark reminder of the dangers that exist in the world. It also emphasized the importance of looking out for one another and supporting those in need. The tragedy forced many to reevaluate the relationships they had with those around them and to question the motives of those they trusted. In a way, Zenifa's death had sparked a conversation that needed to happen, a conversation about trust, safety, and how we can protect ourselves and those we love from harm. Zenifa's family would continue to fight for justice, but more than that, they would honor her life and her memory. They would remember the person she had been and cherish the moments they had shared with her. The journey toward healing would not be easy, but it would be a journey they would make together, holding on to the love and memories that Zenifa had left behind. Thank you for following Zenifa's story as we continue to uncover the truth behind her tragic death. If you've been affected by this case, or if it has sparked a conversation about the importance of safety and trust, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our next video of this journey, as we continue to explore the truth behind the headlines and seek justice for the victims whose voices need to be heard. While the trial may have ended, the questions that lingered in the minds of Zenifa's loved ones and the community were far from answered. How could someone like Ricky Sergey, a man with a job, a family, and ties to Zenifa's own late husband, commit such a monstrous crime? More importantly, how had no one seen it coming? The story of Zenifa Coleman was not only about her tragic death, but also about how evil can quietly grow in the shadows, where in the face of familiarity. Ricky Sergey had always been viewed as an ordinary man. He worked at an auto body shop in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. He was married. He had a young son. By all appearances, he was the kind of man you'd nod on the sidewalk or make small talk with at the gas station. He wasn't known to be violent. There were no public outbursts or criminal records that would suggest he was capable of something so sinister. That is exactly what made him so dangerous. It is a chilling reality that many predators look like everyone else: fathers, husbands, workers, neighbors. They don't always with a face of evil. In fact, the more dangerous ones often don't. Ricky knew Zenifa. He had likely smiled at her. He had probably been in her home or shared a drink in social circles years earlier when her first husband was still alive. He had observed her, watched her life unfold after she became a widow, and waited for the right moment to strike. He didn't need to follow her in the dark or stalk her online. He simply called her under the guise of helping her and used her trust as a weapon. That Ricky's crime wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, deliberate, and cold-blooded. Experts who have examined similar cases often point to a combination of narcissism, entitlement, and psychopathy in offenders like Sergey. Narcissism. He believed he could do what he wanted without facing consequences. After all, he was a family man, a trusted friend. No one would suspect him. Entitlement. He felt entitled to Zenifa's time, her presence, her body, regardless of her will. Psychopathy. A lack of empathy, remorse, or emotional connection to the suffering he caused. He held her captive for days, violated her repeatedly, then murdered her with his bare hands in a house where his own child lived. Then he calmly wrapped her body in plastic, discarded her like garbage, and parked her car just 10 blocks away, as if her life meant nothing. These acts point to a person who not only planned this cruelty, but was capable of returning to normal life immediately after. A chilling trait shared by some of the most dangerous individuals in society. Zenifa wasn't just failed by one man. She was failed by a system that couldn't detect the predator among them. Ricky had no criminal record that would have triggered alarms. There were no reported signs of domestic violence, abuse, or deviant behavior. At least none that had reached law enforcement. But what if someone had looked deeper? Did his wife ever suspect something? Had anyone noticed strange behavior? Was there a history of misogynistic or controlling tendencies that were simply dismissed as just how he is? Too often, the warning signs are minimized, brushed off, or never taken seriously until it's too late. In cases like Zenifa's, the failure doesn't start the day she went missing. It starts long before, when a dangerous man's behavior was either hidden or ignored. What makes this case so terrifying is that it can happen again, and does, all over the world. A woman needs work. A man offers help. They know each other. There's trust. And behind that trust is something far darker. It's crucial to understand that danger isn't always about strangers in dark alleys. It's about the people who know our names, who call us on the phone, who say they want to help. Zenifa was killed not by a stranger, but by someone she had once called a friend. While Ricky Sergey sits in prison, likely in silence, with few visitors, Zenifa's family is left with a weight of grief that never goes away. Her husband never got to see her again. Her mother had to bury her child. Her friends had to reckon with the guilt of not being able to save her. They've done their best to heal, but there are scars that justice can't erase. They will never get her back. All they can do is honor her memory, speak her name, and tell her story. In the wake of Zenifa's case, some advocacy groups in New Jersey began working more closely with communities to raise awareness around intimate partner violence, workplace predation, and deceptive recruitment. Her death became a reminder to always vet opportunities, to trust gut instincts, and to never ignore red flags, even when they come from someone you once knew. Though nothing can undo what happened to her, Zenifa's legacy lives on in every person who hears her story and takes extra precautions. Her name is etched into the memories of those who cared for her, and now, hopefully yours. Zenifa's story is a tragic reminder that evil doesn't always come dressed as danger. It often wears a friendly face. If you've been moved by her story, please share this video to help spread awareness. You never know who might need to hear it. White heavy check mark like this video if you believe Zenifa deserves to be remembered. White heavy check mark subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Candle, leave a candle emoji or a few words of support in the comments for her family. Loudspeaker, and if you or someone you know has ever felt unsafe, please don't wait. Speak up, reach out, and protect yourself. The news of Zenifa Coleman's murder didn't just shock her family. It sent a tremor through the quiet streets of Perth Amboy, New Jersey. the local body shop where Ricky Sergel worked, the neighborhood where his child played, the corner store where he greeted people. Suddenly, these places were re-examined under a harsher light. Everyone asked the same thing. Did we miss something? Ricky's neighbors described him as quiet, respectful, and family-oriented. He was known to play with his son in the yard and wave to passers-by. He wasn't the type to make trouble. And yet, he was holding a woman hostage at his house, just a few feet from where his neighbors lived. Looking back, I guess I remember the blinds being shut for a few days. One woman told a local paper, but I thought maybe they were just out of town, or maybe his wife was sick. Another neighbor said she noticed his car wasn't parked in its usual spot on September 13th. It was a small detail, one of those passing observations we all make and forget, but now it haunted her. No one heard Zenifa scream. No one knocked on the door. The horror of the situation wasn't just what happened. It was that it happened so quietly. Evil had crept in, committed its act, and vanished, all without making a sound loud enough for anyone to act. At the auto body shop where Ricky worked, the guys were stunned. They spoke about him as a skilled mechanic, the type who kept to himself but got the job done. He wasn't exactly friendly, but he wasn't off either. One co-worker said, "We just thought he was private. He never talked about his wife or anything. We just figured that's how he was." Only after the arrest did some workers remember an offhand comment he made about needing someone to help with his kid. Nothing creepy, nothing dramatic, just one of those side conversations over lunch. He said his wife might be going back to work full-time, and he was thinking about getting a nanny, a colleague recalled. He didn't mention any names. Didn't seem weird. Now, I think maybe that was part of it. He was laying groundwork, even here. Predators often test the waters in subtle ways, dropping hints or laying false narratives. When caught, those fragments come together into a terrifying pattern. But in real time, they're often ignored. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is how normal everything looked from the outside. There were no late-night screams, no mysterious visitors, no police calls before the murder, just the silence of routine, masking the presence of a man who had committed unspeakable acts. In communities across the country, this silence is all too familiar. Women go missing, children are abused, elderly victims are neglected, and time and again, neighbors, co-workers, and even family members look back and wonder what they missed. It's easy to say, "I had no idea." It's harder to ask, "Did I choose not to see?" Another layer to the tragedy is the fact that even if someone had seen something, there's no guarantee it would have made a difference. Would a vague concern have triggered police intervention? Would a woman's gut feeling be taken seriously? Too often our systems and our social norms demand hard proof before they will act, even when intuition is screaming that something is wrong. Zenifa's case, tragically, is a reminder that the time act is before the evidence is undeniable. By then, it's often too late. I end the weeks following Sergel's arrest. Perth Amboy residents were left to process the unthinkable. Parents clutched their children tighter. Women looked over their shoulders more often. People who once trusted each other now wondered how well they really knew the people around them. At a small community vigil, candles were lit for Zenifa. One speaker, a local teacher, said, "She came here for a job, to care for a child. She was trying to do right, and she was met by someone who chose to do wrong. We need to protect people like her, not bury them." For many in the community, the case became a turning point. They organized neighborhood watches. Churches hosted safety workshops. Women formed text chains to share job leads and warnings. Zenifa's story became a call to awareness, a refusal to live away from danger simply because it came in familiar clothing. This story is about more than one man's evil. It's about what we all allow when we choose silence over discomfort. Zenifa's life mattered, and so does what we do with her memory. White heavy check mark if you're in a neighborhood, a school, a job where something feels off. Don't brush it aside. White heavy check mark, trust your instincts. Ask questions. Be nosy. Be loud. White heavy check mark shares Zenifa's story. Not just to remember her, but to protect the next person like her. Speech balloon, leave a comment if you've ever second-guessed a situation that later proved dangerous. Your story might help someone else speak up. Eyes and please, subscribe to this series so more people hear Zenifa's name and the warning her story carries. When authorities arrested Ricky Sergo in October 2004, they already had a growing list of suspicions. But suspicions alone wouldn't bring justice to Zenifa Coleman. What they needed, what they built over weeks of quiet, methodical work, was a solid, undeniable trail of evidence. This was no ordinary case. Zenifa had vanished without a trace. Her body dumped miles from her home to make a murder charge stick. Police had to prove that her killer not only had motive and opportunity, but direct contact, and they needed to do it quickly before the public's attention moved on and witnesses started forgetting details. One of the most critical pieces in the early stages of the investigation was Zenifa's cell phone activity. Investigators traced her phone usage on September 13, 2004, the day she left for the alleged nanny interview. The last call she made was to Ricky Sergo, the same man she was supposed to meet about the J.O.B. It wasn't just one call, either. The two had exchanged multiple calls in the days leading up to her disappearance, and even a few just hours before she left home. This gave police their first hard link: contact between the victim and suspect. It also gave them a timeline. After bringing Sergo in for questioning again in October, detectives requested and received written consent to search his home. That consent and a parallel search warrant opened the floodgates. Inside his home, forensic technicians found plastic bags similar in type and thickness to the one Zenifa had been wrapped in, strands of hair consistent with Zenifa's fibers matching those found on her clothing, duct tape with partial fingerprints, traces of biological material later tested for DNA. In the basement, they also discovered marks on the walls and floor that suggested restraints had been used. It was clear Zenifa hadn't simply visited. She had been held there. Most damning of all, his DNA was found on her body, confirming that the two had been in close contact. While there were no security cameras inside the home, nearby gas stations and storefronts did have footage. Police obtained video showing Zenifa's gold Mitsubishi Galant driving into Perth Amboy around the time of her disappearance. One blurry but chilling clip showed what appeared to be Sergo driving her vehicle alone. Police also found two separate eyewitnesses who reported seeing the Galant parked near the loading dock in Linden the night before her body was discovered. Neither had seen who left it, but one mentioned a tall man getting out before walking off quickly. This corroborated the timeline police were building, a timeline that showed Sergo not just speaking with Zenifa, but being with her during the days she was missing and disposing of both her body and car. The police interviewed dozens of people close to both Zenifa and Ricky. While her friends and family describe her as upbeat, optimistic, and hopeful about the nanny job, Ricky's acquaintances told a different story. A co-worker mentioned that Ricky left work early on the day Zenifa disappeared. Another said he seemed distracted and irritable that week. And yet another told investigators that Sergo had made uncomfortable comments about women before, even describing one woman's perfume in eerie detail despite never speaking to her. The portrait that emerged wasn't one of a grieving friend or an innocent family man. It was of a man who had planned something, a man who targeted Zenifa deliberately, knowing she was vulnerable and trusting. Despite all this evidence, Ricky could have stayed silent. He had the right to refuse to talk. But when confronted with the mounting proof, when investigators laid the photos and phone records in front of him, he began to speak. At first, he downplayed everything. Yes, she came to the house. Yes, they talked about the job. No, he hadn't seen her since. But the forensic evidence wouldn't go away. And finally, in the dark hours of interrogation, he confessed. He admitted to inviting her under false pretenses, binding her in his home, repeatedly assaulting her, smothering her to death with his bare hands, wrapping her body in plastic, driving her body to the industrial dock and abandoning her there, moving her car 10 blocks away to divert suspicion. He claimed he panicked and didn't mean to kill her, but nothing about the evidence suggested panic. It suggested preparation. With the confession, DNA evidence, witness statements, and physical proof, prosecutors were confident they could pursue a first-degree murder conviction. Sergo was charged with first-degree murder kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault, desecration of human remains. His bail was set at $5 million. But justice, as always, would be complicated. Serga's lawyers soon began arguing procedural errors, claiming that his confession was inadmissible due to a Miranda rights violation. And despite the overwhelming evidence, this technicality would delay proceedings for years. Still, the evidence told a story too detailed and too damning to ignore. Loudspeaker evidence matters. Forensic science, digital footprints, and community testimony brought Zenifa's killer to justice, but only because people were willing to speak and investigators were willing to look deeply. Stop sign if someone you know has gone missing. Document every detail. Preserve text messages, call logs, emails, photos, anything that can help build a timeline. Brains share this video to show how critical it is to collect and trust evidence, especially when victims can no longer speak for themselves. Speech Balloon, drop a comment if you've ever seen justice delayed or denied due to procedural issues. What do you think needs to change? Bell, don't forget to subscribe to this series and hit notifications so you never miss a video. By the end of 2004, Ricky Sergu sat in a jail cell, indicted on charges that could potentially place him on death row. The evidence was overwhelming. His confession was detailed and damning. Zenifa Coleman's family, while broken with grief, hoped for a swift and harsh sentence. But justice in America doesn't always move quickly, and in Zenifa's case, it would move painfully slow. The courtroom became a haunted space, haunted not just by the fact of a murder, but by delays, legal maneuvering, and an agonizing wait that would stretch on for years. From the outset, the prosecution believed they had a near airtight case. They had a signed confession, DNA evidence linking Sergu to Zenifa's assault, cell phone records showing he was at the scene, physical evidence from his home, surveillance footage, and eyewitness testimony. A clear motive and opportunity. But in April 2008, nearly 4 years after his arrest, Serga's defense team dropped a bombshell. They argued that his confession should be thrown out. Why? They claimed police violated his Miranda rights, the legal warning given to suspects before questioning, informing them they have a right to remain silent and a right to an attorney. They insisted that Serga was interrogated without proper advisement of those rights, and that anything he said afterward, including his confession, should be inadmissible in court. In a move that stunned Zenifa's family and observers of the case, the Superior Court judge agreed. Serga's confession was officially suppressed. That meant jurors would never hear his own words describing how he lured Zenifa under false pretenses, held her hostage, assaulted her repeatedly, smothered her with his hands, disposed of her body like trash. Without his confession, the case was still strong, but undeniably weaker. Now the trial will rely almost entirely on forensic evidence, which the defense could try to cast as circumstantial. Zenifa's family was heartbroken. They had waited years for a trial, believing they'd finally hear the full truth. And now, the very thing that brought them some clarity, the confession, was legally invisible. During these years of legal back and forth, Zenifa's husband and extended family suffered quietly. They were forced to relive the trauma again and again, court notices, media coverage, lawyers' updates, all while never seeing progress. At times, it felt like Zenifa herself had been forgotten. Her name was no longer in the headlines. The outrage that once swept through New Jersey had long since cooled. Other tragedies had taken center stage, but her loved ones never forgot. They kept her photo on their walls. They celebrated her birthday quietly. They lit candles and played her favorite Calypso records. They clung to her memory while they waited for the system to catch up. She's still not at peace, one cousin told local press in 2007. Not while he sits there, protected by the same laws he disrespected. With the confession off the table, the Union County Prosecutor's Office had two options: push forward and risk a full trial with weakened evidence, offer a plea deal to ensure Serga never walks free for decades. After careful consideration and deep consultation with Zenifa's family, the prosecution offered a plea bargain. If Serga admitted guilt and waived his right to appeal, he would be allowed to plead guilty to a reduced charge of aggravated manslaughter rather than first-degree murder. It was a painful compromise. Zenifa's family didn't want reduced charges. They wanted justice in full. They wanted to hear the word murder spoken by a judge. They wanted the death penalty back on the table, but they also didn't want to endure a long, drawn-out trial, only to see Sergei released on a technicality. They agreed. On November 20th, 2008, for years and 2 months after Zenifa's body was discovered near a New Jersey loading dock, Ricky Sergei stood in court and admitted to the killing. He spoke the words himself. "I took her life with my bare hands. I did not plan to let her leave alive." He described holding her down. He described how he smothered her. He described placing her body in the trunk. He confirmed he was the only one responsible. Even if the judge couldn't use his initial confession during trial, he now made it again, in open court, under oath. The courtroom was silent. Zenifa's husband cried softly. Her sister wept with both sadness and relief. There was no outburst, no applause, just the ache of a truth that no family should ever have to hear on February 5th, 2009. Ricky Sergei was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole until he served 85% of the term. That meant, with credit for time served in good behavior, he could be eligible for release by 2034. He will be 70 years old then. To some, that felt like justice. To others, it was too kind. Assistant prosecutor Robert Manella told the court, "The family won't have to go through the pain of a trial, and he's not going to be able to do this to anybody else. That is a fair resolution for this case. Fair but not satisfying. Justice delayed is not always justice denied, but delays come at a cost. For victims' families, every month feels like a year, and every legal technicality feels like betrayal. Loudspeaker, we must demand better. From faster case processing to better protection for victims, the system needs to serve everyone, not just those who know how to manipulate it. Brain, stay informed. Learn your rights. Know what prosecutors and defense attorneys can and cannot do. And most of all, speak up for the voiceless." Folded Hands medium light skin tone shares Zenifa's story. Keep her name alive. Let her not just be another statistic or another footnote in the archives of cold cases. Bell subscribe for more videos like this. The Quiet Years, what happened between 2009 and today, how Zenifa's memory was kept alive, and the disturbing truth about where Ricky Sergei is now. When the gavel fell on February 5th, 2009, and Ricky Sergei was sentenced to 30 years in prison, the cameras stopped rolling. The court emptied. The news cycle moved on. But for Zenifa Coleman's family, the grief didn't fade. There were no more press conferences, no more legal hearings, no more headlines. Only quiet, only absence, only the sharp silence that follows trauma that the world deems finished. But Zenifa's story was never finished. It lingered in every empty chair at Sunday dinner. Every photo on the wall, every child or family knew she would have made laugh. For those left behind, justice may have been served, but peace was harder to come by. Zenifa's second husband, whose name was kept out of most media coverage for privacy, found himself shattered and directionless in the aftermath of her death. They had been married barely a year when she was killed. They had plans, travel, children, maybe opening a business together. Now, he was left with a quiet apartment full of echoes. Friends say he fell into deep depression in the years following her murder. For a long time, he stopped attending family functions. He avoided certain streets in Elizabeth and Perth Amboy. Even hearing the word nanny reportedly made his stomach turn. But over time, with the support of Zenifa's family and faith, he began to emerge from that darkness. He later told a local reporter in 2016, "I'll never stop missing her, but she wouldn't want me to stay broken forever. I know that." Zenifa's cousin started a small memorial fund in her name, dedicated to supporting immigrant women seeking employment in childcare. The fund was modest, but meaningful. Every year on her birthday, they hosted a candlelight vigil and gave out small scholarships to women in her Trinidadian community in New Jersey. They named it the Zenifa Fund. One of her nieces, now an adult, has said, "She died trying to build her life. That shouldn't be her whole story. She was kind. She laughed loud. She looked out for everyone." We want people to remember that. At those vigils, they shared stories, her favorite meals, the way she would hum calypso tunes while cleaning, the way she lit up when she talked about kids. Her dream was to be a teacher one day, not just a nanny, At East Jersey State Prison in Rahway, New Jersey, Ricky Sergel faded into obscurity, but he did not vanish. Correctional records show that between 2009 and 2020, Sergel racked up a small handful of infractions, mostly minor, disobeying orders, possessing unauthorized items, and once refusing to leave the yard when told. Nothing major, nothing violent. He mostly kept to himself. But fellow inmates, some who later spoke anonymously, described him as cold and calculating. One even said, he didn't act like someone with remorse, just a guy who got caught. He never participated in any restorative justice programs, never sent a letter of apology to Zenifa's family, never spoke her name again publicly after his sentencing. And yet, every passing year brought him closer freedom. Because of New Jersey's No Early Release Act, Sergel is required to serve 85% of his 30-year sentence, which puts his earliest parole eligibility date somewhere in 2034. But time served before his conviction, coupled with possible credits, may mean he's out even earlier. This looming reality has created anxiety for Zenifa's family, especially her older sister and surviving aunts. One of them told a reporter in 2022, "I'll be in my 70s when he walks free, but she'll still be gone. How is that fair?" The truth is harsh. Unless new laws are passed or parole board deems him a threat, which is possible but not guaranteed, Sergel could one day be a free man. In Elizabeth and Perth Amboy, the name Zenifa Coleman doesn't spark instant recognition anymore, but ask the older community members, especially among the Caribbean immigrant circles, and they remember, she used to make the best saltfish fritters, one neighbor recalled. Always said she'd go back to Trinidad one day and build a little school for girls. Another community member, a nurse who once knew her casually, said, "She was the kind of person you just wanted to be around. Her light made you feel warm. I still can't believe what happened to her." These are the fragments that keep Zenifa's memory alive. Not just how she died, but how she lived. Despite the brutality of the crime, Zenifa's case has received very little national media attention over the years. Some advocates believe this is part of a broader pattern. Black women and girls go missing or are murdered, and their stories are too often overlooked or forgotten by major outlets. Cases involving immigrant women, particularly those from Caribbean or African backgrounds, are covered less extensively than those of white victims. True crime media has only recently begun to reckon with this imbalance. This is why it matters that Zenifa's story is being told again now, so that her memory isn't buried, so that other women are not forgotten. As of 2025, Zenifa Coleman would have been 51 years old, perhaps a mother, a mentor, a teacher, a business owner, a community leader, a grandmother, even. Instead, she remains forever 30. Her last smile, her last words, her last breath stolen in a stranger's home, a stranger she thought she could trust. Candle, light a candle for Zenifa today. Say her name out loud. Let her not be forgotten. Loudspeaker, raise your voice for justice. Demand true crime media. Amplify the stories of Black and immigrant women. Visibility matters. Memory matters. Books support local causes. If you can, donate to organizations that support immigrant women and combat violence against women in all forms. Movie cameras share this video, share Zenifa's story. Keep it alive. Remind the world that her life mattered. Subscribe for more videos like this. Grief is a shadow. It stretches long after the candles have burned out, after the headlines fade, after the courtroom doors close. For the family and friends of Zenifa Coleman, the sentence was only the beginning of a different kind of life, a life lived without her. Shortly after Zenifa was buried, her family began writing letters, not to anyone in particular, just to her. They were filled with things they never got to say. Her younger cousin wrote, "You promised you'd braid my hair for prom. Now, every time I look at those pictures, I imagine you standing behind me smiling." Her sister wrote, "I still wait for your calls. Sometimes I forget and grab my phone to tell you something funny. Then I remember." And from her husband, "You said we had time. We were supposed to grow old together, but you got stolen before we even got started." These letters were never mailed. They lived in journals, in folded scraps tucked in Bibles, in minds and hearts. But they were a way to keep her close. Because grief doesn't ask for permission to stay. It simply lingers. What justice could never restore. Ricky Serga's conviction brought legal closure, but it never brought healing. There was no justice that could equal the horror of what he did. No prison term that could replace Zenifa's laughter. No sentence long enough to return her to the lives she was meant to touch. Even with a guilty plea, even with evidence, even with 30 years behind bars, the most important thing was still gone. And now, with the years quietly passing, a new fear crept in. The fear that people would forget. But you didn't forget. You made it here. You listened. You stayed. You remembered. And for that, we thank you. True crime is more than shock and drama. It's real people, real losses, real trauma. By staying with this story, you honor the memory of a woman who deserved so much more than what this world gave her. A life remembered. Zenifa wasn't just a victim. She was a daughter of Trinidad, a wife, a cousin, a sister, a woman who smiled big and loved harder, a woman who dreamed of children, who came to America hoping to build something better. She didn't die because she made a mistake. She died because someone chose evil. But that is not the end of her story. Because you listened, because you remembered, because her name is being spoken again. A future we can shape. As we close this chapter, let's not allow it to be the end. Let's flashlight shine light on forgotten victims. Share their stories. Say their names. Challenge the silence that surrounds the suffering of Black women, immigrant women, and working-class women. Reminder ribbons support survivors and families. Donate to victim advocacy groups. Attend vigils. Volunteer. Be part of the healing. Brain question what safety really means. Learn how predators hide in plain sight. Protect your loved ones, not through fear, but through awareness and empowerment. Blackheart, let Zenifa's name mean more than pain. Let it mean resilience. Let it mean remembrance. Let it mean we won't forget. To my viewers, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for walking through this heartbreaking journey with me. I know this story wasn't easy. It wasn't meant to be. But the fact that you stayed through every part means more than I can express. Folded hands, medium, dark skin tone, your time, your empathy, your attention, those are powerful things. They honor Zenifa in ways that headlines never could. If the story moved you, please. Thumbs up, medium, dark skin tone, like this video. Memo comment with your thoughts or memories of Zenifa. Loudspeakers share this story on social media, with your friends, with your community. Bell subscribe so you don't miss future stories that matter. And remember, these aren't just stories. These are lives. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and stay kind. Dove, rest in peace, Zenifa Coleman. You are not forgotten.